Hello, I'm Olly, and this is Criminally, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today, lots of shorter books and some long ones too. It's my wrap-up for September. So, shorter books, because September was, of course, Shorty September, the month when we read shorter books. And a fantastic BookTube event created and hosted by Heather from the Soggy Expat Book Nerd channel and Bert and Sean from the channel Past Story Time. A really, really fun event, and they do great stuff. They did like a zine and things like that for it this month, which you could print out and use to track your reading through, which I didn't do because I abhor having to print anything. But it was a lovely idea anyway. So I've read a bunch of shorter books, and they count shorter books as being under kind of 200 to 250 pages. I think I went a bit over with some of my short books, but hey. So I've read a number of shorter books and also a couple of Stephen King books, which funnily enough were longer, and a few other things as well. I didn't manage to tick off all of the prompts for Shorty September. I got most of them. I think there were 2 or 3 I didn't do in the end. But I'll call out which were the Shorty September books as I go through this wrap-up of everything I read in September. So 22 books in total. What I've done in the past is I rank the books from least enjoyed to most enjoyed, but that's quite difficult to do and ends up being quite arbitrary as well, to be honest with you. When you're talking about a number of books, deciding which was slightly better than another one can be tricky. So I've decided I'm going to stop doing that. What I'm going to start doing instead with these monthly wrap-ups is talk through the books I read in the order that I read them, and then at the end give you my book of the month. So tell you what my favourite book of the month was. Right, so without further ado then, let's crack on. So the first book I read this month was Bag of Bones by Stephen King. So this was for my ongoing Stephen King project, where I'm reading all the Stephen King books that I haven't read yet, of which I can't remember how many there are, about a dozen I think. And this was good. So I've done a review of this on the channel. This was a kind of late 90s Stephen King book from the middle. It's pretty much exactly the middle of his career, so it's quite interesting to read from that perspective. It's one I tried to read at the time and didn't get on with, but I really enjoyed it reading it now. And I think a lot of the themes are about kind of middle age and things like that, particularly being a middle-aged man. So as someone who is now a middle-aged man, I guess maybe it resonated with me a bit more. So a couple of different storylines kind of interwoven in this one of which is about a kind of a haunted house, effectively, but particularly around this author whose wife has died, and him coming to terms with his grief, with that loss, but staying in their summer house, which appears to be haunted, and it's him trying to figure out who or what is haunting it really. But there's also a second storyline which I actually preferred, about a custody battle. So King does a pretty good job of weaving those two things together, and I thought it was a decent read. The second thing I read then, and the first for Shorty September, was The Stepney Green Killer by E.C. Hanson, which ticked off the Rip Shorts prompt for Shorty September, where you read like a mystery or slasher book. So this was also a group read run by M from the channel Dark Violet Dreams, and it was fun to chatting with other people about the book as we read it. So this is a short horror novel that's got kind of a true crime podcast type vibe to it, in that it's about a young guy who's like doing this true crime investigation into a series of murders in the town he lives in. Some quite weird murder stuff going on in it. A really big twist at the end, and it was just a fun short horror read, so I did enjoy that one. I then read, to tick off the Hoochie Daddy Shorts prompt, where you read a kind of spicy biography. I read Yours Cruelly, Elvira by Cassandra Peterson, which was just fantastic. A really, really enjoyable kind of memoir about Cassandra Peterson, who's the actress who plays Elvira, Mistress of the Dark, about her life, basically, particularly about playing Elvira, but also about her her childhood and her career as a young woman, working in Las Vegas as a showgirl and places like that. She lived in New York and was kind of the part of like the gay counterculture in New York at the time. So really interesting. She's had a really fascinating life and name drops a huge number of celebrities in this who she met, during her career. Many of whom, some of whom come out very well. Based on her description of them, some of whom do not come out well at all. You learn some interesting things about some people or celebrities you kind of felt like you knew reading this book. So a really enjoyable, interesting, and kind of heartwarming book as well, that really kind of showcases her determination to succeed in the entertainment industry. And also fascinating because for the past 20 years she's been in a relationship with a woman, so she touches on that as well. And that interesting, kind of apparent conflict between her on-screen persona as Elvira and her private life. It was a really enjoyable, interesting memoir. I had a really good time with it. After that, I read Johann Cabal Necromancer by Jonathan L. Howard, which was a buddy read with one of my patrons, Danny. This was really fun. I've not heard, there's a whole series of these books and I've not heard of them, but it was a really entertaining kind of comic horror, reminding me a little bit of like a horror version of Terry Pratchett or something like that. So about this guy, Johann Cabal, who's a necromancer, who's done a deal with the devil in order to learn the secrets of necromancy, and now wants to get his soul back, basically. And the deal he makes with the devil is that he will harvest 100 fresh souls for the devil in order to win his own soul back. And it's about how he goes about doing that. So some really nice humour in it. It's got a lovely kind of prose style, which was very, very like just a lightness of touch to the writing. Very, very amusing at times, but quite a gripping and entertaining story as well as the humour side of it. And it also had references to a series of books that was like one of my favourites as a kid. The first series of books that I remember just being doubled up in laughter reading, which are the Molesworth books, which are books about this kind of schoolboy in a public school in Britain, which I've subsequently rebought. I think I'm trying to remember now the name of the author. I think it was Gerald Searle. I've subsequently rebought them on Kindle, and I'm going to be reading them soon. But yeah, there's a chapter in the Cabal book that's written in exactly that style, and it's just pitch perfect. Really, really enjoyed it. Right, next up then, the second Stephen King book I read this month, and again I have done a review of this on the channel. That was Holly, his latest book. Very disappointed to learn that the US cover for this book glows in the dark. So a number of people on my review video said, and the cover glows in the dark. And I've got an ultraviolet torch, and I was like shining the ultraviolet torch on my book and turning off the lights and seeing if it glowed, and it doesn't. But the US cover, apparently, like the US cover has got like the house, but a different view of the house that you can see here, with the windows, and I think it's the windows glow in the dark, which is really cool. More book covers should glow in the dark. Anyway, as I say, I've done a full review of this. I really enjoyed it. It's a really good, like, kind of fairly straightforward crime thriller about a horrible, horrible old couple kidnapping and murdering people for reasons that become apparent as the book progresses, and about Holly, who's like a returning character for King, investigating those murders. So if you want to hear more about it, watch my completely spoiler-free review. But yeah, I thought it was a really entertaining, gripping thriller. Just pitch perfect. Again, I've said that already, haven't I? But it was just a really good thriller. After that, I read another one for Shorty September, The Executioner, Book 19, Detroit Deathmatch by Don Pendleton. So this ticked off the Mum Shorts prompt, which is a comfort read. So I just love the Executioner books. They are complete trash and extremely violent. And this one had a really horrible ending as well. They normally have kind of upbeat endings in terms of the fact that the Executioner, Mac Bolan, kills all the baddies and, life moves on. But in this one, there's like a real downer to the ending, which was, left me shaken because I just wasn't expecting it. But yeah, just an enjoyable men's adventure read. Apart from the ending, nothing unusual about it, but it was fun. I enjoyed it, and it definitely fit the comfort read prompt for me. After that, I read a non-shorty, so I read All the Sinners Bleed by S.A. Cosby, which I've been meaning to read since it came out. It was fantastic. So I really like S.A. Cosby's stuff. He's a really interesting new voice in crime fiction, I think, and is doing different things, but doing different things in a way that feels kind of familiar. So he's definitely got his own voice, but he also draws on, influences that you can see from crime fiction over the last 50 years or so. So All the Sinners Bleed was excellent. So it's about a black sheriff in one of the southern states, I keep forgetting which one, who runs the police force in a town which is kind of constant. There's constant conflict in the town between the black residents and some of the more extremely racist white residents, particularly around kind of Confederate statues and things like that, which clearly has been a topic of discussion in the US in the last few years, and similar discussions have been had over here in the UK about statues that commemorate people who made their wealth through the slave trade. So there's a serial killer operating in this town, basically, and it's about the investigation into that. It's just got a fantastic opening. Like the first chapter or two just really set things up perfectly, and it's just really gripping and engaging. Thereafter, the central character is really well done. And you learn, there's a lot about his kind of personal life in the book as well. But not in a way that feels like it gets in the way of the plot, if that makes sense. So I thought it was, another really good crime novel from S.A. Cosby. I am intending to do a review of it for the channel at some point. I just haven't got around to it yet. Moving on then, another non-shorty, although it's not that long, Camp Damascus by Chuck Tingle. So again, I've done a review of this on the channel. This is a fairly new release, came out in the last few months, and it's an entertaining, kind of slightly comic, not massively comic, but slightly comic horror novel about a young woman who lives in a fundamentalist Christian community in the US, where there's this Camp Damascus, which is a gay conversion camp, and it's about her, weird stuff starts happening to her. Basically, she starts seeing these strange creatures, and flies start coming out of her mouth spontaneously, and it's about her trying to put together the pieces of what's going on in the town and why these things are happening to her. So quite a fun, gripping read. Not perfect. Someone in the comments on my review said that they'd read it and they felt it had quite a YA feel to it, which it does. I think that's a fair comment, and that may be deliberate on Chuck Tingle's part, but I'm not sure. But it's got that kind of what's the word I'm looking for? It's very plot driven, and it's got that kind of slight lightness to it. You kind of glide over the story almost. That seems to be kind of an attribute of YA fiction, but it does get into some quite deep, dark themes as well. So yeah, an engaging, interesting read anyway. After that, another one for Shorty September. The Survivalist book, book 10, The Awakening. So this was for the Shorty Shorts prompt for Shorty September, where you read a book from the 70s or 80s. This just felt very, very 80s to me. I really like the Survivalist series. I'm reading them in order. In this, the 10th book, the events skip forward 500 years because the hero puts himself and his family into cryogenic sleep for 500 years to kind of escape the apocalypse and see what happens next in the world. So it's quite interesting when he wakes up, new societies have formed, albeit quite small ones. There's roaming bands of cannibals and things like that. So a daft but engaging and gripping men's adventure type read. So yeah, I had fun with that one. After that, another shorty. This ticked off the Elizabethan Shorts prompt, where you read a historical novel. So this is Edge, book 19, Ashes and Dust by George G. Gilman. So another in the Edge saga of kind of brutal 70s westerns, where Edge, who's this grumpy looking fellow on the cover, travels around the West getting into fights with people, basically. So in this one, he teams up with this woman who's trying to get revenge for some murders of people she was related to. I can't remember who they were. I think it was her husband. So she gets, I think he gets killed, and she gets attacked by this gang of bandits, and she teams up with Edge to get revenge on them. So kind of typical Western brutality, but I had fun with it. It was good. Couple of non-shorties after that then. So I read The Silent Key by Laurel Hightower, which again I'm going to do a review of on the channel. So that comes out I think the 11th of October, something like that. A really good, really solid modern horror thriller. Like really good central characters, a really intriguing plot. So about this woman who's lost her husband and goes to stay with, I think it's his uncle. The uncle's died as well. And they go to stay in the uncle's house, and really weird stuff starts happening, and it becomes apparent that there's a connection between this weird stuff that's happening and the death of both her husband and the uncle. So some really excellent kind of spooky scenes, but also has like a kind of classic thriller style plot running through it as well. That's the wrong book because I've got it on a post-it on the back. Apologies, I've been very unprofessional today. So yeah, The Silent Key by Laurel Hightower anyway. A really, really good book. Definitely one that I recommend. And then after that, read The Whistling by Rebecca Netley with my patrons for our monthly Patreon book club. So this is an engaging and entertaining kind of like gothic supernatural type story about this governess who goes to work in this creepy old house to look after the daughter or the young girl who lives there, who's been struck mute by some terrible events that have happened. And it's, as you would expect, it's about the governess piecing together, what happened with those events, what happened to the previous governess and things like that. Very much, draws on those those typical tropes of like that kind of gothic literature, but quite creepy at times, and just an enjoyable, fun supernatural read. After that, another one for Shorty September, Once Were Warriors by Alan Duff. So I read this for the half and half shorts prompt, where you read a book and then watch the movie. I failed in that prompt in that I read the book, but I haven't watched the movie yet. I did start watching it, and it felt, a lot of people have said in the comments, it's really good, you should definitely watch it. And for various reasons, we didn't finish watching it. But I did start it, and it felt intensely 90s. Like, the beginning of it was like the most 90s thing I've ever seen. So I will go back and watch it at some point. But yeah, my initial reaction was, wow, this is really 90s. Anyway, the book is fantastic. So Alan Duff is an Indigenous New Zealander, and this is a book about Indigenous people in New Zealand. So about their lives. It doesn't necessarily have a plot. It kind of has a storyline rather than a plot, if that makes sense. But particularly about this one family, the husband who's like a heavy drinker and a bit of a brawler, the wife who's just trying to keep the family together, and their kids, and just the events that happen to them, but also the broader community that they live in. So quite disturbing at times, quite brutal at times, very moving at times. A really, really, really good book. I thought it was excellent. After that, another shorty, albeit it's not that short. What was it? 260 pages. Tell Me I'm Worthless by Alison Rumfitt. Another excellent book. So this is the which prompt was this? Hold on. This was the Pedro Pascal shorts prompt, which was for an unexpected purchase, because this is a book I had heard about but wasn't intending to buy, and then found it, like, chanced across it in a bookshop in Brighton, and it was a signed copy as well. So I thought it was fate. I need to buy it. So this was like, excellent. Truly excellent, and I am going to do a review of it. So a haunted house story about two women who've gone through a terrible traumatic event in this haunted house. And the haunted house, people talk about haunted houses having a character in books. I've never come across a haunted house that is as much of a character in the book as the one in this is. So a really effective horror story, but set against the backdrop of the kind of trans rights debate, or trans rights versus women's rights debate that's going on, in the UK and other places at the moment. Alison Rumfitt is a trans author. just a really powerful, interesting book, and has interesting things to say about that debate and about that debate's impact on the lives of people, but also a really, really effective horror story as well. I thought it was excellent. Moving on then, another one for Shorty September. So this was for the Denim Shorts prompt, a modern classic. So this is Johnny Got His Gun by Dalton Trumbo. Just fantastic. Another fantastic book. Just really, really excellent book. So written in, I think, the 1930s about an American soldier in the First World War who's been terribly injured and is basically lying in hospital trying to collect his thoughts almost. So just remembering his past, remembering what's happened to him, trying to figure out what he's going to do in the future, unable to communicate with anyone around him because of the injuries he's suffered. An intensely interesting, fascinating, powerful book, and a very important anti-war book. It became an important book for the anti-Vietnam War movement. And Dalton Trumbo, a fascinating character as well. So one of the people who was blacklisted during the McCarthy witch hunts in the States. So again, I probably will try and do a review of this book because it was really, really excellent. But I've got, as you've seen from this video, I've got a load of books I need to get to review, so they may end up being spaced out over the next few months. But yeah, really excellent. After that, I read The Glass Cell by Patricia Highsmith as part of my ongoing read-through of Patricia Highsmith's works, which I'm doing with Anne from the Channel Land novella. So not my favourite Highsmith. I mean, Highsmith is always pretty good. This wasn't my favourite one. So this is about a guy who's kind of in prison for a crime he didn't really commit, and gets horribly tortured by the guards at the start of the book. And then thereafter, because of his injuries, gets addicted to morphine. So the first half of the book is him in prison. The second half of the book is him out of prison trying to make a life for himself again. So definitely a powerful book about the prison system, and about the defects in the prison system, and how it can end up making the situation worse in many instances rather than better. How incarceration is not always the right punishment for a crime, I suppose. So an interesting book, but it didn't grip me in the way that a lot of Highsmith books have. So yeah, slightly below average Highsmith, in my opinion. And then also read a book I've talked about on the channel, Enter Boogeyman, which is a new horror anthology of stories themed around the concept of the Boogeyman. I thought it was excellent, really, really enjoyed it. 18 stories, all of them are really good. I can't speak highly enough of it. It was just a really, really good horror anthology. A load of different authors have got stories in there. There's a Stephen King story, Joa Lansdale, Ramsey Campbell, all sorts of different people. And some authors who are very well known from the kind of 80s in particular. So people like John Shirley and Craig Spector, but who you don't necessarily see stuff from so much nowadays. So it's great to read some stories from them. A really, really good horror anthology. Next up, another one for Shorty September, and one I didn't particularly enjoy, if I'm honest, Lupe by Jean Thompson. So this was for the Spanx prompt, where you had to read a book about magical witchcraft. Excuse me. So this is slightly weird, very 70s book. About a woman who, for various reasons, so this woman in the States meets this young boy, Lupe, who appears to be in some way demonically possessed or kind of witchy in some way anyway. And thereafter, a couple of people she knows die, and they die in mysterious circumstances, and she gets charged with murder by witchcraft. So it's partly about her meeting with Lupe, and partly about her trial for witchcraft. So it's kind of enjoyable concept, but I didn't feel like it was that well executed. After that, read a couple of thrillers. So I read Where Are the Children by Mary Higgins Clarke. Mary Higgins Clarke being an author that Stephen King recommended in Bag of Bones. So Bag of Bones, the main character is a writer, and there's loads of discussion in that book of writing and books by different writers that the author, the character of the author in the Stephen King book enjoys. And one of the authors who was mentioned was Mary Higgins Clarke. So I thought I'd try a Mary Higgins Clarke book. She was a big writer of suspense fiction in the 70s in particular. And this was an enjoyable suspense novel about this woman whose children go missing. The twist being that 10 years previously, another couple of children she had went missing. And those children ended up found dead. So she was tried for that crime but acquitted. And now 10 years later, the same thing appears to have happened again. And there's question marks over, did she do it both times? And things like that. So an enjoyable suspense novel. Not fantastic. It got a bit ridiculous towards the end, but an enjoyable quick read. And then the second thriller I read was Eeny Meeny by M.J. Arledge. So the first of the Helen Grace series of books. So a British kind of police procedural thriller, which was okay. So a reasonably fun, horrible central concept where the killer kidnaps two people, locks them in a room somewhere, and gives them a gun and says, one of you's got to kill the other one, or neither of you are getting out, basically. And it's about the detective investigating that. So again, like the Mary Higgins Clarke book, it got a bit ridiculous towards the end, I thought, but it was a compelling read while I was reading it. Okay, 2 books to go. So the next thing I read then was A Light Most Hateful by Hayley Piper, which comes out on the 10th of October. I like this, but I didn't love it. I didn't like it as much as I expected to. So this is a book about a small town where weird stuff starts happening. It's got a kind of a bit of an 80s kind of Stranger Things type vibe to it. Central character is a young woman who's kind of a bit of a drifter who's ended up in this town and gets caught up in the weird events that happen. So there are kind of monsters that appear and a kind of zombie type plague that starts happening. So it's very kind of compelling and exciting, and the plot moves along at a very fast rate, but it didn't completely engage me as much as I'd expected it to. And then the final thing I read, not one that I had on my TBR, but Anne from the channel, Anne Novella, very kindly got a copy sent to me. So this is Julian by Fleur Pierrette, which has just been published in September in English, so originally published in Dutch. And Anne indeed was kind of involved in getting an English edition of it published. So had worked with the author and publisher to kind of unite them, I think. This was amazing. An amazing book. Incredibly powerful, really moving, really thought-provoking. I really thought it was excellent. And I'll jump to the end of the video and tell you this is my book of the month. And I've read some, as I said, I read some fantastic books this month, but this was my favourite. I thought it was really, really excellent. So it's a memoir, and not something I typically read. I normally read fiction. This is a memoir written by Fleur Pierrette, who was married to another woman, Julian, and they were kind of artists and campaigners and things like that for gay rights. So they launched a magazine, which I hadn't heard of before, which looks really interesting, called Et Alors, which means, I think, basically So What, which kind of champions, gay rights and trans rights and things like that. So they were a couple, and they decided to embark on this project to get married in all of the countries where gay marriage is legal, which when they started the project was only 22, which seems... it's more than that now. More as they started, working on this project, more countries legalise gay marriage, but it's still not many when you think about how many countries there are. 22 for 3-4 years ago when they started seems like a ridiculously low number. So anyway, they embark on this project, and after their 4th marriage, Julian dies of a brain tumour. And the book really is about, it's about a number of different things. So it's about Fleur Pierrette dealing with the grief of that loss of her, the woman who she thought she was going to spend the rest of her life with. It's about their project. It's about, the importance of championing gay rights. It's about love. It's about loss. It was just a really, really wonderful book. I thought it was truly, truly excellent and deeply, deeply moving, but also just really thought-provoking. And one of the things that Fleur Pierrette does in this book, which is really interesting, is every so often, and the thing that's interesting about like the structure of this book is it skips about in time all over the place, but in a way which like narratively makes perfect sense. But one of the things she does is she intersperses these short, like almost like mini essays where she discusses a famous same-sex couple where typically where one of the people was an artist, or at least one of the people was an artist. So in some cases both of them were artists, and about how their love for each other enhanced their the art that was being produced. And the thing that's and these are often or typically like lifelong relationships or relationships that lasted for decades. And the thing that was kind of fascinating but at the same time appalling about that is that I was thinking, after a while of reading these, I realised what she was doing, that she was interspersing these little mini essays every so often. And I got to thinking, okay, I get it. Same-sex couples can have, really long-lasting, relationships in the same way that any couple can. Why do you keep doing it? Why do you keep talking about it in the book? And I realised that I had this kind of moment of realisation where I thought, for me, in the UK, in 2023, same-sex marriage has been legal for a few years. It's completely normal. But it's not normal globally, which is the appalling thing. It's, many countries, same-sex relationships are still punishable by death, which is just mind-bogglingly awful. And I think by that repetition, she drives the point home in a really, really effective way. So yeah, an incredible book. Really, really, really incredible. I think it's my favourite book so far this year. We will see, when I get to the end of the year, whether that's still the case. But a truly excellent book, and not the sort of thing I normally read on the channel. And it occurred to me actually when I was preparing for this video that my I think I've had 4 or 5-star reads this month, which were this, Johnny Got His Gun, Tell Me I'm Worthless, and Once Were Warriors. Of those, only one of them is like what I would call, in the normal remit of the channel. Only one of them is a crime or horror book, that being Tell Me I'm Worthless. But it shows the importance, I guess, of reading outside your comfort zone, your normal reading area sometimes, because you find wonderful things out there. And I will always go back to reading crime and horror, because that's what I love. And it's my comfort zone. I talked about, the Mac Bolan book as being my comfort read for Shorty September. So I will always go back to those kind of things and always be entertained by them. And, they're good. It's reading as entertainment for me, but reading should be more than just entertainment sometimes. And this is a book that kind of embodies that. So that was my September. Hope you had a good September too. Let me know in the comments what you've been reading. Let me know what your favourite book of the month was. Let me know if you took part in Shorty September. And as always, thank you very much for watching. Hope you're safe and well out there. Hope you're reading good stuff. And I'll speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.